start. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Geraint Davis. I'm the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Air Pollution, and it's fantastic to have you all in great numbers today to talk about the pressing issue of air quality, and what local government can do about it. By way of introduction, I used to be, in fact, leader of Croydon Council, which happens to be the biggest council in London, and had to pioneer the tram link there. I'm taking a particular interest in air quality. People may know that the World Health Organization guidelines are planned to change tomorrow, but we've been campaigning here to have enforceable limits of 10 micrograms PM2.5 per cubic meter of air as a start point, as a guiding light for other enforceable guidelines. But of course, the question for local government isn't sort of who, it's sort of how, and what powers you've got and what resources you've got to deliver health benefits and sustainable development and net zero for all our citizens. And so I'm, looking forward to a very interesting conversation here. There's been a lot of focus, obviously, on diesel cars, and other vehicles which generate more pollutants, obviously, than petrol, certainly more than diesel, and what powers there are to, limit traffic speeds, to limit where cars go, to have less parking, to have charges and fines, of more public transport, cleaner public and private transport, etc., etc. There's an issue, of course, about wood burning. People will know 38% of PM2.5 is from wood burning stoves, and the actual smoke itself is much worse than cigarette smoke. And I'd be interested to know whether people think that the government should either give local government powers to ban these or phase them out, either overall or in a discrete way in particular neighbourhoods. There's issues about incinerators. Of course, local government is given obviously tax disincentives to landfill, and so people are turning to incinerators. The one in Edmonton, by way of example, will generate 700,000 tonnes of carbon a year, and there's issues around ultrafine particulates that get through the filters, that get in the bloodstream, cause dementia and other problems people are familiar with, hearts, minds and lungs in essence sort of an aging process. And there's a increasing knowledge about the problems of mental health, both for the old and the young, in terms of depression, anxiety, cognitive capability, concentration and the like. So we need to think about incinerators and perhaps more powers and resources for recycling. People may have views on higher and quicker charges on taxing plastic, so people value plastic and don't just chuck it away all the time, etc. So those are the sort of things I'm interested in, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things we want to focus on. So without further ado, it's really a great pleasure to introduce Councillor Waseem Zafar, who is, of course, the Transport and Environment Cabinet Member for Birmingham and a CEO and magistrate as well, MED, of course. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Waseem, and to kick us off with 10 minutes of thought-provoking stuff. Over to you, Waseem.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you for that kind introduction, and good morning to colleagues. I just want to talk a bit about what Birmingham, the journey that Birmingham's been on in terms of cleaner air. In a city of just over 1 million people, over 1,000 people die prematurely each year because of illegal and unsafe levels of air quality. And if you're a child growing up in this city, you lose 6 months of your life just because you're growing up in Birmingham. That is the level of challenge that we've got, aligned to some of the major health inequalities that we've got in the city, and we saw them firsthand during COVID. The resilience of our communities, particularly in some of the inner city areas of Birmingham and some of the white working class communities, as a result of air pollution and other health inequalities, caused us huge challenges during this pandemic and reminded us about the level of challenge we've got. Towards the end of 2017, we were given a government ministerial direction to get our nitrogen dioxide to legal levels in the shortest possible time. So we went on a journey to introduce a clean air zone. And when we carried out the modelling that we did, ultimately we had to introduce the most challenging of clean air zones, clean air zone D. In fact, we call it D plus because clean air zone D on its own won't get us to legally compliant levels in the shortest possible time. So we've got to put in some extra interventions, including take away 6,000 free car parking spaces within our city centre, making some modifications to the highway network and improving the bus reliability in our city too. So for the last 3.5 years, the clean air zones literally taken on my life. It's made me hugely unpopular amongst a lot of the citizens in the city. But as I remind myself each morning, I didn't come into politics to be popular. I came into politics to change lives. And this is the sort of project that will change lives and will save lives ultimately too. So the initial figures are really positive and we're doing a lot better than we are. So launched in June this year. 80% of the vehicles that come through the city centre are actually private vehicles. And we're nearly at 90% compliance. So nearly 9 of the 10 cars that come into the city centre actually aren't impacted. And that's increased substantially. We've gone from 3/4 to 90% with the introduction of the clean air zone. So people's, are upgrading their vehicles, which is really, really important, getting compliant. But on its own, we wouldn't have been able to achieve this. We ensured that we negotiated with government to get some exemptions for the communities that absolutely need this, the poorest communities, those that work, and the lowest paid workers in our city centre. So we've given out over 8,000 local exemptions, some of them for 12 months for workers, some of them up to 2 years for the residents that live in the CAS. And we've also got £40 million worth of grants that we're continuing to give out to those, particularly the taxi community who desperately need this. So we are taking action. We're being bold. We're being brave. Which is creating some political challenges for us, particularly coming up to our election. But we have to do this. We absolutely have to do this. But the key question is, what else will Birmingham City Council need to really address the wider challenges and go beyond what we're doing? And we've got a very strong air quality strategy that we've now developed, which goes beyond getting to legal levels. In fact, I talk about getting to safe levels in every single neighbourhood in our city, and I want to ensure that every child who goes to school in a school in Birmingham goes to a school where we're at safe levels and we're not hindering, but we're enhancing and supporting the growth of our young people in the city. But together, I think we need to take some further action on particular matter, and I'd love to see us as a government, as a country, take on the World Health Organization limits on that. I absolutely believe that local actions need to be aligned to national policy, and in some aspects in the clean air zone that did help, but in some aspects of the pricing, we had to set our own pricing, and the pricing, £8 a day for a non-compliant car and £50 a day for a non-compliant bus or lorry, is different to what other cities are having to locally identify. So trying to get to a place where there's some consistency in terms of pricing across the country will really help. I think taking our people and our businesses particularly on a journey with this is really important. So it's about how we work with people and do things with people and with our communities rather than to our communities. Would love to see some extra powers on Highways England, or whatever they call these days. I think they've just changed their name, because we've got a motorway, the M6, running right through the heart of Birmingham. I'd love for us to be able to bring the M6 toll into national ownership, so we can push the passing traffic towards the M6 toll without them having to pay any charges. And then we would obviously just get the Birmingham related traffic coming on the M6. That change, bringing the M6 toll into public ownership, where would improve air quality substantially overnight in a city like Birmingham. But if there's one thing I'd wake up and so, which after Aston Villa winning the Premier League, I keep reminding myself that is my ultimate wish. But my second ultimate wish and the most important in terms of air quality is investment into transport. Having a London-style transport system in Birmingham would fundamentally make the biggest and most positive change to air quality. We're being brave and bold in terms of ensuring that we're taking space away from private cars and giving it to walking, cycling, and most importantly, buses and other mass transit systems. But building 0.5 mile of tram in a year is not going to address our air quality challenge. So we need the resources, we need the extra powers. Give us what you give London, I'll say to the government, and see how we improve air quality. There's no two ways about it. That is the one ultimate thing that would, the government talks about levelling up. level up the transport system. You know, at the moment it's a two-tier system. You've got a London system and you got everywhere else. So, you know, let local authorities run bus services. Let's go beyond enhanced partnership, beyond franchising, and not make it as complicated as it has. I know Andy Burnham's taking a lead on some aspects of that, and other mayors are following, but let's make it simpler, because the Bus Services Act 2017 made it harder for local authorities. And give us the investment, and then you will see, you know, I get told every day I'm not coming out my car until the bus service is at London standards. Let us build the trams that we need. So that's where I'll close and just say that I think will be the biggest change you will see in improvement in air quality right across our cities. Thanks, Sharon.
Well, that was really fantastic. Thank you so much for that contribution. I was scribbling down on that. Now, without further ado, can I turn to, well, obviously, if you've got questions, put them in the chat, and we'll try and get through all the questions. I'm going to take all the speakers first, because obviously we're covering a lot of ground. So next we've got Councillor Sarah Warren, who's the Deputy Leader in Bath and North East Somerset, and Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Sustainable Traveller. I was down in Somerset Way talking to a few people there. I know there's concerns about the power stations there as well, involved in that. But without further ado, over to you, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So like Birmingham, Bath has been on a clean air zone journey as well. So we were part of the second wave that were, as part of Client Earth's legal action against the government, and were mandated to bring in a clean air zone. So in our case, we were the first charging clean air zone outside London, and we went live on the 15th of March this year with a Class C clean air zone. So we are not charging private cars, we are charging taxis, vans, HGVs and buses. And we've had, you know, a lot of support from the Joint Air Quality Unit, which we're very grateful for, and we've been able to offer finance for businesses and people needing help to upgrade their vehicles. So we're very grateful for that, for the support we've had with that, and we've put together a very innovative financing system, in fact, which we're now sharing with other councils that are going ahead with their own clean air zones. So that's really, it's been really positive, and we've seen, as a result, we've seen a reduction across the whole city in nitrogen dioxide levels of around 12% over the first 3 months. So that's positive. We know that we've upgraded 500 vehicles, and we expect to see 1,500 upgraded by the end of the year. And of course, those vehicles don't just drive within the zone, they drive in the wider area. So they'll be improving air quality more widely. But what I would say about the clean air zone model, which has been the government's favoured model for councils improving clean air, just as Wasim said, I think we would like to go further. So it's very focused on upgrading vehicles, which is an important thing to do. But I mean, in Bath, we're a smallish city with a big rural population who in fact provide much of our workforce. Because the house prices in Bath City are quite high. So a lot of the workforce are commuting in, and our rural bus service has really deteriorated to the point where, you know, there's very little bus service from many places. I mean, and in fact, you know, I'm receiving, at the moment, since term started, I'm receiving daily messages from parents whose children have been left at bus stops. So we've got really major issues with our bus service, and our ability as a council to influence that is not what we need. So I'm really pleased that with the West of England Combined Authority, we'll be working on a bus service improvement plan, but I am concerned about whether it will provide us with enough money and powers to really bring about the step change that we need to see in our public transport. Similarly, I'm very pleased that government is now providing money for active travel, for cycling and walking, which again will provide alternatives, because Bath is a compact city, so there's lots of scope for cycling and walking. And now that electric bikes have come along, of course, you know, our hills are less of a problem because we are a very hilly city. So I'm really pleased that government is providing that money. But once again, it's coming to us at a time when council finances have been absolutely decimated by COVID on the end of 10 years of austerity. And it's very hard for us to respond to the timescales because we're quite a small council. It's hard for us to respond to the timescales and with the tight constraints that are coming along with that money. So, you know, just to have a bit more funding across the board and to you know, and support with that would be good. And again, we are pleased that government in those ways is supporting both clean air and active travel and public transport. But what would be good, I think, is I've received feedback from people visiting Bath's Clean Air Zone. So we've had a really big communications and public engagement programme around the health aspects of it and the finance that's available for upgrading vehicles. So local people are really starting to get their heads around it and to understand what it's all about. But visitors coming from other parts of the country are not familiar with the signage, they're not familiar with the idea, and some of them are getting caught out, and I'm getting that kind of feedback quite regularly. So I think more of a national campaign from government to explain to people both the issues with clean air and also, you know, with the climate emergency and how it's good for their health, and to encourage them to leave their cars at home would really, really support councils in bringing about the change. Because at the moment it does feel a little as though, although the money's coming to us, we feel a little bit alone in trying to push through these changes. And like Wasim, you know, I'm finding that it's very difficult for people to get their heads around the fact that sometimes we're trying to take away road space or parking space in order to prioritise cycling or walking, and that's a difficult thing. So I think those, I mean, the key points are around the funding, the powers, and the support in terms of public communication from government, because we are very ambitious, and like Wasim, we would like to bring in a more stringent strategy and to focus on particulates as well. And there I would say that particulate monitoring is expensive, and again, it's it's a difficult thing for councils to afford. So we are very ambitious, and we would just like more powers, more money, and more public support from government with it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. It's really very helpful indeed. And we'll come to questions, but obviously it strikes me that if we were doing more charging, that could be hypothecated to a rural bus service to subsidise it. But anyway, moving on, can I now invite Tom Parks, the Air Quality Officer for Camden, to fire away. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, hi everyone. Tom Parks, I'm the Senior Air Quality Officer at Camden Council. So I lead Camden's air quality programme. So, you know, in Camden, we like to bang on about this quite a lot, but I think we were the first local authority in the UK to formally adopt the World Health Organization air quality standards. And that was derived from a sort of community engagement piece where citizens in Camden very clearly expressed the fact that, you know, the right to breathe in clean air was one of the core pillars for what they wanted to see from the borough by 2025. So we have a very clear mandate in Camden to do more to protect the public from you know, the damaging effects of exposure to air pollution. And you know, the kind of the public narrative about that is backed in the evidence that we have. So you know, we know from modelling and from research done by Imperial College and from the GLA, the Mayor of London, that air pollution in London is believed to lead to about 4,000 premature deaths each year. And from some research from the Clean Air Fund and CBI Economics, we know that air pollution causes economic damage of about £1.6 billion in London each year. And that's on top of the social care and healthcare costs. So clearly air pollution and poor air quality is an enormous burden upon society, both economically and in terms of the kind of the intolerable health and well-being impact that it has for people. And we know very clearly as well that in London and in other cities in the UK and abroad, air pollution doesn't affect everybody equitably as well. There are certain communities and certain parts of society which are disproportionately negatively affected by exposure to air pollution. So it's clearly, you know, a kind of a crisis. It is talked about as a crisis. It is a crisis that we collectively have to deal with. So in Camden, our approach has been to try and, you know, we adopted the WHO standards in recognition of the fact that the national air quality objectives aren't aligned with what we understand to be the true health burden of particulate air pollution, especially. and we've tried to engage the community in our policy development and to bring people into the conversation about what we need to do in the borough, but also trying to lead by example, encouraging other local authorities to take action as well. And it's clear to us, we know now that the community, that other people in London and elsewhere are very increasingly aware of the fact that air pollution affects their health. There's a lot of pressure on local authorities to be taking action to improve air quality. And I think most cities in the UK probably will have seen progress, as Councillor Warren and Councillor Zafar have alluded to. We have seen improvements in air quality, but it's not enough. Reductions in NO2 don't necessarily equate to reductions in particulate matter, which we know to be the more serious part of air pollution. So we're sort of stuck at the moment in that we know what we need to do, but we just don't have the resources in terms of personnel or funding to take the action that we see as being necessary to achieve ambitious and more ambitious air quality targets for the protection of public health. So in Camden, for example, we see there's a lot of particulate pollution coming from things like wood burning, and wood burning in London in the 21st century is, I think, an entirely avoidable activity. Camden is extremely well connected to the gas grid and to the electricity grid. So there's no reason really for people to be burning wood in 2021, and yet it still happens a lot. It's an increasingly popular activity, and I think we've not really had much support from the national national legislation. I suppose we don't have the devolved powers at local authority level to be able to take action where we see it being necessary locally. So we're trying to enforce legislation from 1993 which isn't fit for purpose, and we can't take action to protect people who are complaining to me on a daily or weekly basis, saying that their neighbour is burning wood or coal in their home, and the smoke is filtering into neighbours' homes, and it's affecting health. It's people believe it's causing asthma in their children, and there's nothing much that we can do with the current regulations. So we need to have the political agency to be able to take local action to deal with these sources of air pollution, and this is just one example of among many. But we also need the funding to be able to enforce against pollution where we see it occurring as well. So, I mean, the main perspective from a sort of an officer dealing with air quality on a daily basis, I suppose, is that we know what needs to be done. We can see there are people out there who are experiencing negative outcomes as a result of air pollution, but we just need the support, whether it's increased funding or other resource afforded to local authorities. And I think I've seen there's other sort of air quality officers from London on the call. I know they're in exactly the same situation. There is a collective drive to be able to do more to protect health, but we just need a bit more support, I think, from it. And it's London, we have relatively good support. We have funding from the Mayor's Air Quality Fund, which is an invaluable source of funding for various ambitious projects to reduce transport emissions and other emissions. But we need some more sort of more support nationally, I think, is my perspective. I don't want to moan too much, though. We are seeing progress.
All right. Have you finished, Tom? Sorry.
I'm finished, yes. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Just put that. Fantastic. That was really very illuminating. And I'm asking for questions now. And hold on, I'll just open my chat again. There's a comment in the chat saying Mark from Australia, which is good to know that a lot of people are watching this. And obviously, this is COVID times, and there are some benefits in being able to widen the audience here. Who says, Wazim, London buses are like nothing for an hour. This is talking about London, by the way, not Birmingham, but London buses like nothing for an hour and 4 and 3 minutes. I'm not sure this is quite fair, to be honest. I was on a bus from Paddington to Westminster yesterday. It's much better than the tube, I've got to say. What is working from home, like in the UK, we are 40% in Sydney working home. Our volatile organic compounds are down 69% on a pre-COVID level. So I'll do a round of the panelists. I wanted to ask a few questions myself, but you might want to mention, as I say, this issue about working from home. For questions. Now I've got. Hold on. Sorry, I'm not doing too well on my. Just to be with you now. I'm having a few technical problems. This says here in the chat that there's 4 questions in the Q&A box, but I haven't got. Zoe, can you read out those questions?
Yes, so one of the first questions is a simple question, just how does the control over the public transport differ from London to the rest of the UK? Is it a funding issue or more where the decisions are being made?
Right, well, what's next?
And the GLA London Atmospheric Emissions Inventory suggests that by 2020, NO2 concentrations in the most polluted central boroughs of London would derive more from commercial and residential heating systems than diesel engines. What tier of government has responsibility to ensure that such heating systems are improved so as to reduce NO2 concentrations? As I understand that substituting green hydrogen for natural gas would not result in much less NO2.
Okay, next.
How would you like to see the political risk of local authorities bringing in measures to improve air quality limited? And what
So can you say that one again? How would you like the political risk? Oh yeah, of bringing in air quality measures reduced for local authorities. So I presume that means obviously that some local authorities will be less bold than the ones we've got here today and think, oh no, we're a marginal borough, whatever we happen to be, and we won't do this in case we lose the election. I guess that's about, yeah. Okay, yeah, carry on.
What do we need to do to achieve air quality targets in London and nationally?
Right. Is that the end?
I'll send you the others in a message on the chat.
Okay, lovely. All right, well, if you got those, I'd be interested in people commenting on this. I've got a couple of questions for the panel as well, and some people have touched upon these things. In particular, I was particularly interested in everybody's comments. But in terms of the Camden, doing the sort of World Health Organization standards on your own, as it were, I was just wondering, what the prospect was to spread best practice, and the fear that, in fact, you can't control the air quality of neighbouring boroughs, keep on churning out more fumes. And I think we should, in terms of the questions that have just been posed, my own take on it is that that the car manufacturers, can see the way the cookie's crumbling and are taking some action to reduce diesel emissions, and taking some actions, obviously, to pioneer electric cars. And alongside that, we've got this massive growth of wood burning. In Swansea, just anecdotally, there's a place called Bill's Merchant called Hancock Brown that advertises it's got 100 sorts of wood burner. And the more these people have got wood burners and spent money on them, the more difficult it is to ban them. I was wondering what people think about the local government having the ability to ban them, or whether that should be a national thing. And I think I'll leave it there. I think we've heard the other. So can I, in terms of what's been said, can we go straight back to the start then, to our first speaker, Wazim, to make a few comments about some of the questions that have been answered. And I think we hear you. Obviously, the central message that you need more powers and resources is clear. And what we want to know is, what should be done. What should government do? And in fact, we should be campaigning nationally for. The wood burning stuff isn't something that most MPs are talking about at all. I mean, I am, but I think it's sort of, for some people, it sounds like it's in the too difficult box, but it seems to me it's going to be crucially important as more and more people get affected by them. So can we start with Wazim for a few comments based on the questions and what we've heard?
Thanks, Sharon. Some really interesting questions. The political risk one is, I think, a really, really important question, because I've literally lived through that. In 2018, we had a change of electoral system in Birmingham. So we went from 3 elections every 4 years to all-out elections in 2018, and the next elections are in May 22. And I can honestly say we would not have had a clean air zone if we had the old system, because I would never have been able to get that through my own Labour colleagues, never mind anybody else, because the moment one election finished, the campaigning for the next one started. And already we're seeing some of the opposition parties who are directly linked to the government are promising to reverse the clean air zone. And you know, I would have liked to have seen more political support from the government, because I've always pitched this as a non-political sort of project where we do away with the politics. And I'd love to have seen a government minister stand side by side with us at the launch, but they were, because of local politics, we didn't get that. The other really interesting point is about the powers that London has. Sadiq Khan, as the mayor of London, literally runs the buses. He chooses the fares, he chooses the routes. In Birmingham and elsewhere, we've got a deregulated bus market. So I can, or anybody in Birmingham can purchase a coach, and within 40 days, they can be running on any route in the city. Literally, that's what you can do. We can't control those. What we do have powers over is ensuring that the reliability of the service is improved, and we've made some advancements, and we need to do a lot more as a local authority. I absolutely understand that. Wood burning obviously comes up regularly. We need some stringent law changes on that, but also on the trains. You go to Birmingham New Street Station, they stand on the platform there, and you've got trains idling, diesel trains idling, because electrification literally hasn't been as successful as it could have been. So, you know, we need to look beyond cars as a mode of transport. We need to look at how we can electrify the trains. I know the University of Birmingham are trying some really innovative stuff around hydrogen trains, and we've in Birmingham got 20 hydrogen buses, and we've got a bid into government for 200 hydrogen buses. And I'm told there's no city in the world that's got that amount of hydrogen buses. So we want to be the national test bed for hydrogen buses. And I think, again, that will be a massive game changer for us. But the key thing for me is don't just give us the powers, give us the money as well. I want to keep saying that until we get there.
Right, fantastic. Over to Sarah.
Thank you. There's lots of really interesting questions there, so I'll pick up on some. Somebody asked about the proportion of working from home, and I understand that we currently have, at May 21, the Office for National Statistics was saying that 25% were working from home as opposed to 12% in 2019, but of course that's evolving. So yeah, to pick up on London, Transport for London Powers, absolutely. I think there's a whole range of differences. As Wasim says, it's not only it's money, but it's also, they have some different powers. I think they have stronger powers than other councils, for example, to restrict traffic around schools and so on. So it's both money and powers, the difference between London and elsewhere. I think I was really interested in the question about the nitrogen dioxide emissions from commercial and residential heating systems. So that's a really challenging area because, so what we obviously need to do actually is be moving away from gas heating and towards air source heat pumps. But that's an area where we actually need to build up. So air source heat pumps use electrical power. So any emissions will be further away from cities. And of course, as we decarbonise the grid, then there will be less and less carbon emissions as well. So we'll be reducing both carbon and nitrogen dioxide emissions. But that's really challenging because the industry itself, I think, in this area is nascent. Really, they're evolving, and some of those people who are interested in training to retrofit houses have had their fingers burned by previous government initiatives where money was put in and then taken away quite shortly afterwards. So I think what we need is an absolutely clear steer from government that they are going to build up this industry and they are going to support it, and they're going to support it, in the long term. And there's also work that needs to be done to sort of get the market ready, because at the moment, so in order to put in an air source heat pump, you need a highly insulated house. So it's quite a complex thing. We need to create the market to ensure that both homeowners and private landlords are ready to put that investment into their properties, and to ensure that there are fitters available to do those retrofits. So it's a really complex area, and councils like ours are very keen to get involved and to help, but actually it's a very difficult problem and probably needs some very clear leadership from government. And that will, of course, have the impact of reducing both carbon emissions and nitrogen dioxide. I'd agree. So on picking up a different point about the political risk, I think actually more legislation obviously makes it easier because, Bath is a council that swings, Bath and North East Somerset is a council that swings between different parties. So that our Clean Air Zone was started by the previous administration who were Tories and has been continued by us. But certainly having the legislation in place made it very clear there wasn't a choice to make. We didn't have any option except to just go ahead. And so the more legislation there is in this area, you know, the clearer it is for councils what's expected of them. And you know, the less political points can be made, because this is such an important area for public health. We have to take it out of being a political football. It just needs to be clear that the right thing should be done. And I suppose the final point, somebody talked about car manufacturers, and that's where we've been doing a lot of work, obviously, to upgrade our vans. Now, Bath's a city with a lot of terraced housing, and that's a challenge, of course, when people want to move to electric vehicles. And we've also got constraints on our local electricity grid. So that's another area where government perhaps, you know, has a role in expanding the powers of the network operators, district network operators, and of Ofgem to ensure that they have a responsibility to upgrade the grid in line with meeting our climate emergency and nitrogen dioxide objectives. So whilst, you know, reducing the overall mileage driven is an important factor, we need to get to a place where those vehicles that are still on the roads are as low emitting as possible, and electric vehicles are part of the solution. And there are all kinds of barriers, again, for a small local authority with challenges like a lot of terraced housing to overcome. So more support around that would be welcome.
Excellent. And I know you mentioned the heat pumps and the highly insulated houses there, Sarah. I was just going to ask, there's been a lot of research now on indoor air quality and problems around indoor air quality, and you know, not least volatile organic compounds, but you know, all sorts of sprays people put on themselves, on the surfaces, our furniture, and all this sort of stuff, and the need for ventilation. I'm going to be controversial here, but I just wonder, how does that fit in with the need for highly insulated houses? I presume what it would mean is we would have to basically do them at the same time to ensure there wasn't a lot of chemicals floating around in order for people. So there are sort of issues there. A lot of these issues are obviously people making money out of things which aren't very good for people's health, that you'd have thought the government might be a bit stronger on legislating on. Now over to, I think, Tom, you haven't spoken on the questions.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so I mean, there were lots of really interesting questions in there. So there was sort of a question alluding to the fact that, as we've spoken about, commercial and domestic properties are an increasing source, predominant source of NO2 in urban areas. And as Councillor Warren's already stated, you know, we can kind of tackle elements of the climate crisis and the air quality health crisis if we were better able to replace fossil fuel-based heating in properties with heat pumps and that kind of thing. So, you know, there was a question about which parts of central government would be responsible for helping to drive, you know, that kind of dual purpose tackling of those two crises. I think in terms of decarbonising existing buildings and reducing air quality impacts from existing buildings, it's business, energy and industrial strategy, which obviously already provides funding through the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which is a great opportunity for local authorities, NHS, schools and universities to decarbonise their own assets and their own buildings. And in Camden, we're working on a project to try and, you know, reduce carbon and air pollution from one of our buildings. But it doesn't apply to privately owned or privately rented housing, or indeed social housing. So if we want to try and reduce air pollution and carbon emissions from the housing stock, and ultimately from commercial properties, there needs to be funding support coming through to decarbonise these existing buildings. Similarly, with new developments, the local planning policy framework sets out how local authorities, as planning authorities, are expected to enforce, planning rules and, deal with the planning process. And that's from Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. But, locally in London or in other cities, there may be more ambitious targets to see air quality policies enforced to better protect existing residents from the impacts of new development and new buildings when they're operational. But currently we're sort of restricted by what we can do and the sort of policies we can set by what comes through from the National Planning Policy Framework. So there needs to be more ambition from central government in that particular department to increase the standards and the expectations for achieving, net zero new builds, but also allowing other authorities to go further if they see an opportunity to have even stricter sustainability policies for new developments as well. But I think I'm really glad you made the point about indoor air quality as well, because that also translates to what people as occupants, either in a workplace or in a home, would be exposed to in a new building. I think it's going to be extremely important that standards for indoor air quality and trying to minimize the use of chemicals in paints and furnishings are applied and strengthened progressively as we go forward, just to protect people's health whilst they're indoors. I think there are questions in the chat about what has working from home been like in the UK, and whilst people may have been less exposed to pollution from roads and on the school run and that kind of thing, people may have been living inside properties which are potentially really full of harmful chemicals, or if people have a heating system or cooking facilities which they can't afford to upgrade, that's a prime source of indoor air pollution which can be really negatively affecting everyone's health. And I think the whole one of the purposes, I suppose, of this session is to talk about the limitations of the current local air quality management framework, and one of those is that it doesn't address indoor air quality at all. And I think that's going to be absolutely fundamental, given that the figure that's often bandied about is that people spend about 90% of time indoors, and given that you can find the same types of pollutants in indoor spaces as we do outdoors, it makes complete sense that we need to increase our focus and our attention on making our homes and our schools and our workplaces healthier spaces, and that's by improving regulations and building control, but also just by raising awareness of the fact that there are small things that people can do to make spaces healthier and safer for them and for their families. I think there's comments as well about occupational health. Similarly, I think it's absolutely vital that health and safety executive starts to sort of better recognise occupational workplace exposure to air pollution as being an important thing to deal with and to regulate as far as possible. I know the British Safety Council has campaigned for a number of years on for air pollution to be considered among workplace risk, and particularly they focused on the exposure of outdoor workers, so transport workers and construction workers and many others, to huge amounts of air pollution that they experience whilst just doing their jobs. So I think it's going to be vital that occupational exposure is also considered as one of the many elements of sort of the interfaces of the public and air pollution that we need to deal with. I think local authorities struggle to deal with the existing set of air quality, local air quality management regulations. So I don't see how we could possibly bring on additional responsibility currently for enforcing occupational health and safety requirements. I think that needs to come from employers, but it also needs to come from government as well. There needs to be sort of, it needs to be passed down, I think, for there to be a sufficient recognition of the fact that people doing their jobs can be exposed to harmful levels of air pollution which can affect their health, and no one should have to experience that as part of their work. And that was the last point I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, well, that's very interesting indeed. And people may know, I'm sure Tom knows, that of course there was a groundbreaking bit of work done by the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health on indoor air quality. And as has been said, there needs to be more rigor on this. And also in the chat, as has been said, in terms of occupational health, people shouldn't be subjected to appalling air quality, which is giving them coughs, colds, and making them sick. And there's been a number of studies to show that if the private sector even on its own improved air quality in some of these places, they would increase overall productivity, because obviously the workforce wouldn't be being sick all the time. because they're ill. So, and in terms of the point that Tom's making about resource, clearly, you know, we want environmental health services locally driven, because you're properly resourced to protect human health, and in so doing help, you know, children's health in school and people at work. And the other thing I was going to mention, I don't know the exact figures, but I know that Sarah mentioned 25% working from home, and obviously I assume that means the average. So clearly a lot of people now are moving to this sort of doing some work at home, some work in the office. There's obviously values in working in the office in terms of, you know, teamwork and this, I think, to a certain extent. But clearly, if 25% of work was done from home, in simple terms, you know, we could take 1 in 5 cars off the road. And the problem we've had post-pandemic is people haven't been using public transport enough. But as we settle down, we should be moving to a situation where we've got, you know, clean, green public transport, more working from home, less congestion, less movement, less need for new roads, etc. And move forward on this. All the comments that this has been recorded, and I think we're intending to write this up, hopefully as a transcript, but also then as a load of recommendations that we can take forward. And certainly from where I'm sitting, there's nothing that's really been said that, you know, I would object to, and I'm personally happy on behalf of the APPG to put this forward to ministers or to try and capture all this wide range of things. I don't know if people, we're going to end at 10, but I was wondering, I know this is, you know, obviously a multi-dimensional, complicated things, and as we speak, I'm sure the panel sort of ideas are jumping into their head. I wanted to come back to Wasim in particular about his comment about train idling, and obviously we you know, we've been talking about wood, we know about indoors, etc., and now obviously we need to talk about trains. And of course there's the issue of ships coming into places like Southampton. There's issues about increasing aircraft, etc. But on the train idling, I think maybe I misunderstood, but seemed to be a passing comment about how electric trains aren't what they, you know, were made out to be, and we've still got problems with sort of certainly we've got problems with hybrid trains sitting there with diesel, and the issue about how we should do hydrogen trains. Was there anything further you wanted to say about this, Wasim, or can you make any other sort of final sort of quick closing comments, because we're going to run out of time otherwise. But over to you, Wasim, again.
Thanks, Karen. Just to clarify, I wasn't critical of electrical trains. I was just I was more concerned about the lack of electrification of the train network. You know, we've not seen much in certainly our park. I know we're getting, I think, the Cannock to Walsall line, but we could have got a lot more, and I don't think there's been the right level of investment or focus from government in that. In terms of the comment, the kind of scene that you just set in your remarks about post-pandemic, how things will shape up. You know, in Birmingham, pre-pandemic, we had 300,000 journeys by car, which were less than 1 mile, so a quarter of the journeys per day. Now, I'll be really interested to see how that evolves, and you know, the appreciation for better air quality from communities and the value of, you know, green space and blue space has increased substantially. And just the acknowledgement of good health and well-being has also strengthened in communities. So it'd be really interesting to see how, when we start to get back to normality, we are starting to get there, to see how the shorter journeys, and how many shorter journeys can we shift to walking and cycling. But you know, the whole working from home concept, again, that needs to settle down. But we've certainly seen the peak on public transport's not what it was. It's at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in Birmingham, which seems to think people are using that more for leisure and shopping purposes, coming into the city centre than work purposes. So, you know, the whole concept of local high street. So I think the pandemic has created massive challenges, but there's some real opportunities in how people are starting to work. You know, the number of times I've had to catch a train to London for a half an hour or a 45-minute meeting, that's not going to happen. You know, the fact we're having this conversation with people from not just all over the country, we've got people from Australia who are joining us on this really important technology, which we're all used to now. I think is really important. So all this will, I think, shape how people's, I think we've got to understand is people's life habits. It's not just how people travel, but it's the whole concept of how that comes together. So I think there's some real opportunities that we need to grasp. And obviously all this is linked to the challenge around other environmental issues, particularly around climate change. In Birmingham, we've set our target to be 2030 carbon neutral. Okay, it's going to be a huge challenge, and it's not just transport. I know there's been other colleagues who've touched upon the importance of ensuring that we've got zero emission houses. We've got passive house pilot taking place in Birmingham. We really want to expand that, but ultimately we need government investment into retrofitting the homes that we've got, particularly where we've got the poorer families and people really living in fuel poverty, is how we can give them the right level of investment to support them. The whole just transition is really important. It's not, we can't set up our failing communities to fail further. We need to support them, and that means resources. Thanks, Chair.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Sarah.
Yeah, I've had a few thoughts as we've been talking of things that haven't been mentioned yet. So one that hasn't come up, I don't think, is bonfires, and that's something I hear quite a lot about from residents. And the powers that councils have to tackle these seem to be really quite limited. So that would be something worth considering, because I know that residents get very frustrated at the apparent unwillingness of councils to deal with the issue, when the problem is that we don't really have the powers to do this very effectively. So that's one thing. I noticed that someone mentioned in the chat the suggestion of moving freight out of HGVs onto rail, which would reduce emissions, and I would wholly support that. And clearly that's something that has to come from government, but that would be great to get a lot of HGVs off our roads and freight back onto rail. I suppose another strand to that actually is about sort of localising our economy more and making sure that we support local farms, local food growing, and and then we won't be transporting our freight such long distances. So that's another strand, and that will support reducing both carbon emissions and nitrogen dioxide as well. And another strand I picked up from the chat was a suggestion of trams, which of course have lesser emissions than buses because you don't have the particulates coming from tyres on the road. And again, I mean, very supportive of trams, but it's a difficult thing for a small local authority to do on their own. So that would require, very clear leadership from government. So I suppose to summarise where I think we've got to, I think through the Clean Air Zones programmes, we're definitely taking steps in the right direction. And in Bath, we've seen a 12% reduction in nitrogen dioxide over the first 3 months. But I think we need more and clearer public ambition across the board of every area that sort of supports improved air quality from government. And I think that councils are very ready to work with them, but we do need that support.
Great. And over to you, Tom.
Yeah, just a quick thing from me, really. I completely echo what Councillor Zafar and Councillor Warren have just said. There is the desire to do a lot at local level to try and protect public health, and it just is a matter of resourcing and political agency to be able to take action, whether that's through improving legislation to make it effective in dealing with things like bonfires and smoke control, or whether it's just providing the funding to undertake local transport interventions to reduce road pollution and that kind of thing. I think one of the key messages that I'd probably like to get across is that we've seen there's an increasing call upon MPs and upon government to adopt the World Health Organization standards in the draft environment bill. As a council which has already adopted those, we see that we're really going to struggle to achieve the WHO standards in Camden unless there is sort of a national adoption of targets, just because otherwise we're limited by the sort of the national objectives, which don't really have much bearing on the true health impacts of particulates. So we strongly encourage other sort of local leaders, councillors, MPs to get behind the movement towards adopting the WHO standards, and as the WHO standards are tightened, to aim towards those as well. So currently we're aiming for something which is so far removed from what we really should be working towards, just because we've seen for a long time how much of an impact air pollution has upon people, both in terms of health and well-being, but also upon society in terms of costs as well. So we really need to align our ambition with the true health burden of air pollution. So the more authorities, the more members of parliament that support the adoption of WHO standards in national legislation, I think, you know, we start to build a bit of momentum, and then that feeds into being able to set and to tighten regulations and other elements of policy which can help us to tackle each of these individual incremental sources of air pollution, so that we can more effectively protect health, which, you know, we know we need to do.
Yeah, no, well, that's fantastic. And I should say on that, you know, I very, very much support that, and I've been pressing in Parliament and to the Select Committee for the adoption of the WHO standards in the Environment Bill. And where we are at the moment is that the Lords have put some more recognition of WHO in the Environment Bill, and that will come back to Parliament. But the key issue then is whether the government will just again vote it down. And then the key issue then, I'm going to be slightly political now, if I may, is that obviously the government's got an 80 majority. That follows if 40 Conservative MPs broke the whip, who might be, you know, MPs in, I don't know, so-called red wall seats, who are worried about their survival as well as their promotion. You know, it is important that people, there's about 70 people in this meeting. It's now the time is to encourage everybody to write to their MPs, in particular MPs on the government side, who you know, might think, oh, okay, well, you know, let's vote for this amendment to that the Lords have put in to have the WHO standards, so that we could all work together for public health for the whole nation. But that's just a passing comment. The other comment I was going to make, sitting in Wales, as it were, well, I'm not actually, I'm in Westminster. I should make a comment on the working from home, that I was able to do much more work from home, because the situation is you can be in a debate on one screen and in a select committee on the other. When you're called to debate, you can speak in that. But now I'm here, I've got to choose. So today I'm going to go to the EFRA committee, talk about food poverty, instead of talking in a debate. When at home, I could have done both. So it is unfortunate, again, Parliament is perhaps sending the wrong signal, that the right signal is we've got hybrid working, where some is physical and where you can do it virtually and speak to people from afar without them having to get on a train to come to a meeting in London. Let's do that. And finally, in terms of agency, people have mentioned, I very much, having been a leader, I very much think more power should be devolved. In Wales, the Climate Change Minister, Julie James, who I share a seat with as it happens, has got, you know, joint control of transport and housing alongside climate change. So, you know, we've had a moratorium on incinerations, a review of all new road buildings, but clearly isn't in charge of fuel duty. And in terms of what was said about, oh, let's get more freight on the train, I mean, again, I've got to agree with that, but we have to remember that I think, you know, fuel duty's been now frozen for 10 years and is remarkably relatively cheap to go in a car, a diesel car, versus going on the train. So these are things that sadly can't sort out at a local level. And I guess finally, I think at the start, as he mentioned, the motorway through Birmingham and controls there, because clearly the Environment Bill does put more responsibilities on local government, and the issue is they've got the power to actually influence what's affecting their air quality, rather than saying, oh, there's a motorway there, we do all these things, and then suddenly there's an increase in motorway traffic and it's all blown away. Sorry, I'm abusing the chair, I'm talking too much. My basic point is all this will be written out. I think we all agree in this room, virtual room, that it's been a fantastic array of excellent speakers. We've really enriched our debate, and this will be written and taken forward and certainly put to ministers. But I'd encourage you to continue your work outside here promoting clean air and to get people banging the drum, in particular on the WHO guidelines, but also obviously giving local government the powers to do and powers and resources to do the job we all want to do to improve our citizens' lives. So that was a very long sum up, but thank you so much, everyone. I think it's now time to end, but hope we'll all meet again virtually soon. Yeah. Bye bye from me, and perhaps everyone can wave and say goodbye, and I'll switch off. Good to see you, Tom, and Sarah. Thank you.